Welcome to 365 Christian Men, where every day we aim to inspire and encourage with real-life stories about men. January 16th. Malcom, Gladwell. In 2013, Malcom published David and Goliath, Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants. Throughout the first year of research on this book, he collected examples of people's disadvantages turning into advantages. For example, many American presidents and British prime ministers had lost a parent in childhood. A young shepherd boy beat the giant Goliath. Malcom spent time in libraries and talking to social scientists, poring over research to find how this had happened. Today's story begins as Malcom meets the Derksens, whose daughter has just been murdered. Surely this disadvantage could never be turned into any kind of good. Turns out, it took more than 20 years for Candace's killer to be found. Here's what Malcom found out.
Jesus gives ordinary people extraordinary power if they are willing. Malcom was on his way to Winnipeg to interview Wilma Derksen, whose teenage daughter Candace had disappeared on her way home from school. A week later, she was found, her hands and feet bound, but she was dead. At the time, the search for Candace had become Winnipeg's biggest manhunt in the city's history. As the tragedy unfolded, Wilma and her husband Cliff were called to a news conference. One of the reporters asked, "How do you feel about whoever did this to Candace?" Cliff said, "We would like to know who the person or persons are so we could share, hopefully, a love that seems to be missing in these people's lives." And then Wilma added, "I can't say at this point that I forgive the person. We have all done something dreadful in our lives or have felt the urge to." The Derksens' lack of vengeance and anger intrigued Malcom, and he wondered how a family whose daughter had been brutally murdered could find such strength. Wilma told Malcom that her family had immigrated from Russia after suffering persecution for their faith, and she grew up in the Mennonite tradition. "I was taught that there was an alternative way to deal with injustice," she said. "I was taught it in school, and we were taught the history of persecution. We had this picture of martyrdom that went right back to the 16th century. The entire Mennonite philosophy is that we forgive and move on." Ironically, Malcom had also grown up in a Mennonite community, and his family was full of seminarians and preachers. The running joke back then was that Malcom was the only one who hadn't preached a sermon. But when he moved to New York, he stopped attending church. He still believed in God. He just held on to the evidence and physical side of God, the logic of the Christian faith. Outside of logic, he thought, there wasn't much else to hold on to. But as he was talking with Wilma in her garden, he felt a change of heart. She seemed so normal. How could she overcome something this horrible? And he saw what he had been missing in his own faith, the power of Christ. It was one thing to read in a history book about people empowered by their faith, Malcom wrote, but it's quite another to meet an otherwise very ordinary person in the backyard of a very ordinary house who has managed to do something utterly extraordinary. The Derksens, through their press conference, showed the whole country the path to forgiveness. This could only be explained by the power of Christ at work within them. It was what Malcom had been missing. He knew he had his own journey to take. Just like the people in his interviews, he had been missing the power and beauty of the faith he grew up in. "Here I was writing about people of extraordinary circumstances," he wrote, "and it slowly dawned on me that I can have that too." Psalm 73:26 says, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." Do you see the power of God working in your life? Jesus gives ordinary people extraordinary power if they are willing.
Thank you for listening to today's story. Every day of the year, our hope is to inspire you with real-life stories of faithful men who have gone before us. Hebrews 12:1 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." Join us tomorrow for another story at 365christianmen.com.